let's take a break from items and magic items for a little bit and have a different Top 10 Tuesday. Let's talk about my top 10 homebrew rules for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. If you want to see what they are, stay tuned. Small set of rules up front. These are, in fact, homebrew rules. These are not optional rules that are presented in the player's handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, things like that, as things you can do if you want to. These are completely made up either by myself or by someone else, and they are not in any particular order. They're not in order of like least cool rule to coolest rule. These are just my top 10. Once again, it's my list. Yours may differ. Number 10. Number 10 is ability score rolling and how you roll for ability scores or determine ability scores in general. I did a whole video on this long time ago asking people for their opinion. Maybe I should ask it again now because the channel's grown substantially. But how do you guys roll and determine your ability scores? The player's handbook gives us a couple options in the 4d6 drop the lowest and point buy. In my games, I've always done 4d6 drop the lowest 7 times, and you keep the highest 6. So it's still dropping, keeping the highest number, and then you roll 7 times total, keep the highest 6 of that. Occasionally, I have said I let people roll 2 sets. You roll your first set of ability scores. If you don't like it, you can choose to roll again, but you have to use the second set. You can't say, oh, I like the first one better and go back. Sometimes I've thrown in you can re-roll 1-1 throughout the whole set. I've also had friends, and I've used a couple times, power rolling from 3-5, where it's 5d6, keep the highest 3, re-roll 1s and 2s. The thought process with a lot of this is people like to play higher power characters, and it also gives them the opportunity to be more variable in choosing feats and things like that. So that's my number 10. It's a pretty base thing. A lot of people determine things very differently, but it's one of my favorite things to do. I love creating characters and rolling for them and the excitement on people's face when they see all those 6s come up on the dice. But yeah, let me know how you roll in the comments. Number 9. Number 9 is something I actually first experienced in the Adventures League, and it's not necessarily a rule per se, but it does fall on the honesty rule between you and your players, and this is the idea of pre-rolling attacks and damage. So if you've ever played in a Adventures League game, and it's not all of them, but sometimes when you're playing in structured play, you have a limited amount of time. You're there for 2 hours for your session, and essentially, the session needs to be complete within 2 hours because the next group is coming in behind you. I'm talking about conventions specifically. They're going to come in behind you, so your game needs to wrap. And you want to finish everything because you spent the money or the time, whatever, to be there. You want to experience the whole encounter. So when you get to that last combat with usually the big bad guy of the encounter, the DM wants you, to complete it. So we need to expedite this. So basically, I've had an experience with a DM that they said, let's pre-roll for combat. So right now, it's player A's turn, but player B, through the rest of the table, you guys can take your chance now, roll your attacks, and roll your damage. And once somebody hits it, the DM will tell you the monster's AC is 17. You guys pre-roll your attacks and damage roll so you have it so you can speed things up and move the combat along. This is especially useful if you have a very large table with 8 players or more. It's going to be crazy. You're going to try to get through all that. Combat's going to take forever, so this can speed it up. Now, I can already see what some of you are saying. Boy, that's boring. When it gets to me on my turn, I'm going to tell you I swung twice, I hit once, I deal this amount of damage. I agree. There is something to waiting for that moment of the die roll coming up, and oh man, it's a natural 20, but then you got to gather all your dice and roll all your dice. So what I've implemented is taking that a step further in my home game, which is only 4 players. But what I've done is I said once somebody hits the creature and learns what the AC is, I will let you guys pre-roll attack and damage or cast spells or whatever it's going to be But what I want you to do is descriptive combat. You know whether or not, rather than you rolling to see if you hit, that having to describe that you missed and then rolling again to see if you hit and then describing that you hit, if you pre-roll your attacks and damage around each turn and it comes to you, you can then describe to me in a colorful way how you went for your strikes against the enemy and how you succeeded or failed in that respect. This allows you to keep the combat going. The party can start to visualize it. If you're doing like I do, where you do a show for people to watch, then people can get more into it. If you were doing this in a podcast form, especially, this could be really good because it's being very descriptive for people to imagine how things are going. But, if it's my turn and I roll and I miss and I roll and I miss, but if I do this ahead of time, then I can say like, yeah, I run in twice with my sword and I swing once high and I miss, and then I come around low and I miss again, then you at least have an idea. Or like I slash once, I do a spin move, whatever it is, but you'll know the outcome of what those attacks are before you start trying to describe the combat. Number 8. Number 8 is actually a new rule I just heard of today, and I really like it. I've yet to employ it in any games because I haven't played any, but I'm thinking I want to incorporate this, and this is the idea of exhaustion on 0 hit points or exhaustion on death saving throws. The thought process is, and I'm sure you've experienced this, is the idea of boomeranging, if you will, where you go down to 0 hit points, then someone pops you up with a potion or a healing word, and you're like, ugh, I'm back in the fight. Then you get knocked out again, and ugh, I'm back in the fight. And there's no downside other than you getting knocked to 0 hit points and then someone having to spend resources on healing you. There's no negative to that. And yes, you could clearly argue that this has to be with you being a hero and being heroic, but it then again takes the fear out of the 0 hit points or the rolling death saving throws. So the thought process behind this homebrew rule goes one of 2 ways. Every time you hit 0 hit points, you gain a level of exhaustion. So this makes it terrifying for people to come and heal you and bring you back up, and then for you to get knocked back down. It may make you think about retreating, or at least being more strategic in how you handle things. The other more brutal version of it is every time you roll a death saving throw, you gain a level of exhaustion. That one is just, I think that one's a little too much for my table, but you can roll 2 or 3 times, pass, fail, and then, now you're starting to roll. Now you've got, say you get to 5 saving throws, right? You get 2 fails and 3 successes and you pop up. You're at 5 levels of exhaustion. I think there's only 6 levels until death. So the next time you'd roll a death saving throw, you're dead. That's one very simple way, without altering any of the rules for resurrection mechanics or anything like that, to severely improve the idea of the danger of death. So it's something I haven't used yet, so I don't know how it works in actual play, but it's something I want to consider, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. Number 7. 7 is something that I've done a whole video on as well, and a lot of you have seen, is the idea at a feat at first level. I really like this because I think it allows the characters to come up with a lot of interesting backstory. It allows certain characters to start to get to their build, if you will. Like if you want to be a polearm master and you start building your character and you're like, well, I can't get polearm master till I'm level 4, or I have to be a variant human to get that feat up front. But if you get a free feat at first level, well, now you can be a polearm master out the gate. It also allows for other interesting options as far as racial feats and things like that. You may take a feat you might normally not ever take because it doesn't fit into your build. Again, we're talking more people who are going on the more optimized path, but, for everyone in general. I don't know a ton of people that take the prodigy feat as an elf, a half-elf, or a half-orc, but as a free feat at first level, that may be something you want to look into. There's a lot of different conversations, and again, you can watch that whole video about it to find out more information, where I go through the idea of how do you determine a feat at first level? Is there limitations? Do players describe to you their backstory and then you give them the feat? Do you just let them choose? And again, for everybody who's always asked, the way I've run it is if the person is a variant human, they get 2 feats. They get the feat from being a variant human and a feat at first level from the free feat at first level. And in honesty, I've played through a bunch of campaigns with a character with that, and it really wasn't that overpowered. Number 6. It's fitting with the idea of all of this Critical Role content coming out that number 6 is how do you want to do this? This was made popular by Matt Mercer, although it's been used, I'm sure, by a ton of people beforehand. This is the idea that when you get to a point where someone fells a very important, very powerful, or the last enemy in a combat, you ask the player as a means of determining that, one, the creature has fallen. How do you want to do this? So they struck out, they attacked the creature, and you say, how do you want to do this? And they describe to you as descriptive as they want how the creature is felled by them. Sometimes it could be as simple as like, oh, I slice its head off. But in my mind and the way I've run it at my table is players can go as crazy as they want to go with this because that's the fun of it. You know, I think at one point someone was fighting a treasure golem and they uppercutted the treasure golem with their fist and then pulled out their backpack and then caught all the gold and the treasure from the golem in their backpack. That was how they wanted to do that. And it was fun, and it's a moment that everybody still talks about, and it just expands the fun at the table. So that's why it's on this list. Number 5. Number 5 is you only being able to use the help action to help with an ability check if you are proficient with that ability. And the reason I say this is I find, depending on the game you play in and depending on how people understand the rules, using the help action outside of combat is really, there's no reason not to do it. Like, hey, I really want to move this rock, okay? Make an athletics check. And then somebody just says, well, I'll help them, so that way they can get advantage on their athletics check. And that's, again, on the DM to allow or disallow that. But in theory, moving a rock is something people could help you with, and it's just a free way for players to get advantage on different rolls. So what I instituted was the only way you can help someone on an ability check is if you are both proficient in the ability. So if the fighter says, hey, I'm going to move this rock, I'm going to make an athletics check, they're proficient in athletics, and the wizard, for whatever reason, happens to be proficient in athletics, they can help. And that stemmed from ideas like that. The big, strong, burly, tanky character wants to move the rock, and the feeble 8-strength wizard says, well, I'll help you so you can have advantage. And really, I mean, you could make an argument, and if someone does make a very well-structured argument as to why the feeble-minded, or feeble-strength wizard, rather, can move the rock, I mean, maybe they're going to make the argument they're going to use some sort of magic, and then at that point, it's just like, well, why don't you just use your magic to move it in the first place? But that is the thought process, especially for like knowledge kind of checks, like, oh, make an arcana check. Oh, I'll help them as they read through this book. I'll read over their shoulder. Well, it would only make sense that if the wizard's reading this book, trying to discern it with arcana, that again, the barbarian who's not proficient in arcana can't provide assistance because they just wouldn't have any knowledge of it. So in my games, to be able to help someone use the help action on an ability check, you need to be proficient. You both need to be proficient in that ability or skill, I guess. Number 4. Number 4 is one I also adopted from Campaign 1, Matt Mercer's Critical Role, which is the idea of potions as a bonus action. It's honestly become such a common thing in 5th edition that I've been to multiple tables. One, and I mean, people argue that they think that this is just the way it is. They just assume that potions are a bonus action, which is a little bit of a shocker if you go to a table where it's not, or an Adventure League game where potions are indeed an action. And there's merits to both, right? Potions as an action means, listen, you really need to think about, do you want to use this potion right now? Or is there something you can be doing better as far as using healing magics, as far as casting a spell or attacking or running away? Is using a potion the best move? And as an action, that does make that choice a much more grave one and more substantial. But I've always liked potions as a bonus action. I find more often than not, potions are something you have and you're like, I don't really want to use it because I don't want to waste my action. So using it as a bonus action makes sense. I still make it an action to feed a potion to someone else, but I think the potion as a bonus action is a useful rule. Again, all of my players, in any of the games my players have run for other people, have instituted potions as a bonus rule in their games. And it seems to be, again, very widespread use, so I think that there's a reason why. Number 3. So let's face it, strength is a severely underpowered stat, no pun intended, in 5th edition. Dexterity is a power stat, right? Dexterity fuels ranged weapon attacks, it fuels finesse weapon attacks, it fuels your armor class, it fuels one of the most popular dexterity, or one of the most popular saving throws for damage in dexterity saving throws. It does several different skill checks that are super important in a lot of ways: sleight of hand, stealth. It's your initiative score, and it's several tool checks like thieves' tools and things like that. Dexterity is a super powerful stat, as I've just stated. Strength is thrown weapon and melee weapon attacks, strength saving throws, which are few and far between, and athletics, and that's it. Yes, I know it's technically carrying capacity and lifting capacity, but in my experience in 15 plus years of Dungeons & Dragons, that very rarely comes up. Unless it's something completely ludicrous, like you're going to carry the dragon body, then the DM may say, well, hang on, let me see how much you can actually lift. But for the most part, I'd say it doesn't come up. Again, I'm sure you guys will tell me otherwise in the comments if I'm wrong. So I do feel like in that respect, strength does get severely underpowered. So one thing I've implemented in my games is something I took from 3.5 and possibly older editions to make strength slightly better. It doesn't help it out completely, but it does help. And that is that if you are wielding a two-handed weapon, so a maul, a great axe, a great sword, your strength modifier that is added to the damage is 1.5 times the modifier rounded down. So if you have a 5 strength, you're going to take that strength modifier, multiply it by 1.5, and that's going to be your new damage bonus that you're going to be adding in, if that makes sense, right? So if you have a 4 strength or a 4 in 18 strength, so your modifier is a 4, that means that the damage bonus you're going to add to your attack roll isn't 4, it's going to be 6. So it gives you a slight increase in your damage as a two-handed strength-based fighter, or strength-based character, doesn't have to be a fighter. It's not a huge boon, but I feel like it's enough that it does make people feel more valued when they take strength and try to go the two-handed route. But I'm curious again what you guys think. Number 2. While we're on the topic of underused and underutilized ability scores in 5th edition, let's talk about intelligence, the dump stat for 90% of characters in 5th edition. Strength, as we stated, has multiple uses. Intelligence saving throws are even rarer than strength saving throws. The only skills that are tied to intelligence are what I call the knowledge skills, right? Arcana, history, religion, and nature. And it's only utilized by characters that need it for spellcasting. Artificer, Wizard, and then the Eldritch Knight and the Arcane Trickster Rogue. Other than that, and the role play aspect of having a high intelligence doesn't come up at all. It doesn't determine your attacking rolls. It doesn't determine your initiative, any of those kind of things like we discussed previously. So one small thing I've done to improve intelligence is something I, again, adopted from 3.5, is that for each positive point of intelligence modifier, you gain an additional language of your choice. So if you have a 12 intelligence score, that means you have a +1 modifier. Therefore, you get to learn 1 additional language. If you are a wizard or a high intelligence character with a 20 intelligence, then that's a modifier of 5. You get to add 5 additional languages known to your list of languages. And the thought processes behind that is you are that intelligent and you've read this many books and that kind of thing that you've picked up these additional languages. And again, that's a very small thing to do, to add, to make intelligence a little bit more useful, but that may be the deciding factor of whether or not you put the 10 in intelligence or dexterity. Well, you say, I can get a +1 to my initiative, but I'm wearing heavy armor, so it won't go to my AC, but hey, I can learn an extra language, and in this campaign, that may be pretty useful. Another thing I've heard people use is put intelligence as what determines your initiative modifier. That's another way to make intelligence more powerful, but I tend to just stick with the improved languages. Number 1. And number 1 is the idea of stacking inspiration. I believe it's technically written in the player's handbook, and if you look at the way it's described on the character sheets, you're only technically allowed to have 1 inspiration at a time. I feel like most DMs I've encountered either don't use inspiration at all or don't remember that that's the rule. That's why there's only 1 checkbox on the character sheet for inspiration. I allow my players to have multiple instances of inspiration. And the reason I do so is I actually use inspiration cards. If I can find a link where you can pick them up, I'll put the link in the description. And basically what it is a 52 card deck. Actually, it's a 54 card deck because there's 2 jokers. And you can play... One, you could just use them as playing cards if you wanted to play game poker or whatever. But each card has 3 things on it. It has a... it can be turned in one... Or not 3 things. It has 2 things on it. But you could turn the card in as inspiration to re-roll as you would to get advantage like you would with inspiration. It also has a numerical value on it that goes from 1 to 3. You could choose to turn the card in to add a +1, +2, or +3 to your given check that you're making, attack, roll, ability, ability check, or saving throw. Or each card also has some sort of thing written on it that you can turn the card in and use the card's ability. And I use those, 1, because the cards are a great physical way to track who has inspiration, but those uses have come up to be really useful in game to help the players out and get them out of sticky situations. You know what? In fact, let me go grab a couple and I'll just show you what I mean. So the first one I have here is the Jack of Diamonds. It says Manifest. That's the name of the ability. You could use it to add a +2 to a roll, or its thing is your next action causes a wild magic surge, right? And it says it right there, and it shows you Player's Handbook, page 104. This one here is a 2 of Hearts, Enthusiasm, help an ally as per the help action. So the thought process is these sort of break the concept of, in some cases, break the action economy. This one here is Wired. Right, this is a 4 of Spades. You are not surprised. Find yourself in a surprise situation. Turn that in. What do we got here? Fated. This is a King of Spades. Choose an enemy you can see. Gain advantage on all rolls versus that enemy. So the thought process is as these increase in value to face value cards, they're more powerful. And the idea is you want to go through the whole deck, right? So if someone gets this card, it goes to the bottom of the deck or into like a discard pile, essentially. And then you keep going. The only difference is the aces go back in the deck after use. So here is Cruel. This is an ace. The aces are the +3 cards. It says shuffle this card back into the deck after use. Your successful attack is a critical hit, right? So that's one of the aces. I happen to have another one here, which is Confident, which is the Ace of Diamonds. 1 skill check instantly succeeds to the maximum effect. So you kind of get the idea of what these cards are. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel and you like what you're seeing here, feel free to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of my content. They always say ring the notification bell on every other YouTuber's videos, so I'm going to tell you, I don't know, maybe do that. I've been doing a lot of news coverage videos, so if you want to stay up to date on what's been going on lately, that's probably a good way to do so. I do also stream on Twitch, definitely every Tuesday, supposed to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm pretty bad about that, but definitely every Tuesday. I'm hoping to come back on Wednesday with more character building stuff until a stream gets kicked off later on in the year with an ongoing campaign. More to come on that in the distant future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.